Welcome to Health Systems CIO's interview with Anika Gardenhire, Chief Digital and Information Officer with Ardent Health Services. I'm Anthony Guerra, founder and editor-in-chief. Anika, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Anika, you want to start off by telling me about your organization and your role?
Sure. Ardent Health Services is an organization of around 30 hospitals and around 200 sites of care. We serve patients and consumers in 6 states, 8 markets. We are typically in mid-sized urban markets and really creating the connective tissue for the patient whole person and looking to be that partner in health across the lifespan for the individuals and the populations and the communities that we serve.
All right, very good. Anything about the digital and information officer? Are we throwing digital in there? It's the new thing. Very good. Did that change the portfolio at all, or is it sort of just an acknowledgement of some of the things that CIOs have evolved to be doing now?
I think the real sort of orientation around the word digital is that sort of um, transition from analog to a more automated business. And I think it speaks to the sort of ever evolving role of the CIO from sort of infrastructure and systems to the app layer to more integrated into the overall business functions. The way that I talk about technology in the organization is I typically talk about it from the perspective of a really important member of the care team, a really important member of the team. And when it doesn't work well, it's like a really important member of the team didn't show up for work at their best today.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, and that dovetails with the topic you're going to be speaking on at Vive, the topic you spoke at the Chime Full Forum, which I think are pretty or similar, but you could tell me about the differences, which is this concept of sort of business continuity, resiliency, dealing with outages in the best way possible, understanding the massive impact that these outages can have. You use the example of someone not showing up to work. I always think of it as telling a carpenter or framers of a house to go do their job, but they can't use their tools. And you'd stand there and you'd go, "What do you mean? I can't do what you want me to do because I don't have the tools." That's how dependent everyone has
Absolutely.
become on these tools that they've been given, and you understand that more than anybody. It being what you experienced, what was it, a couple years ago with the ransomware, or was it more
Just
recent?
a little over a year ago,
A little
actually.
over a year ago.
Knock
So
on all.
super recent. So let me just ask you to jump in there wherever you want. Your topic for the Vive, and I know they're trying to be cute with the titles, is every now and then tech falls apart. It's this idea of resiliency and business continuity. I'm going to let you jump in and I'll have follow-ups wherever you want to go with that.
For sure. I think holistically, the conversation is about how to ensure that the core of our business, the core being caring for people, isn't disrupted when technology has a disruption, which is inevitable for a whole host of reasons. Whether that's some type of cyber attack, whether it's the need to sort of bring things down for traditional maintenance, whether it's some other type of utility failure, inevitably there are going to be points in time where we have this need to operate and continue to ensure that our core business is moving forward without technology. And so it's about how do you plan for that? How do you build resilience around it? How do you ensure that you understand when you're investing for preventative versus investing for recovery, and walk through those types of decisions. And so I think the more that holistically as an ecosystem, we are sharing knowledge, collecting knowledge, making shared decisions around that, the better we will be to sort of one, thwart attackers, but also support each other when we're finding ourselves in a difficult situation.
Yeah, and I've been looking at this for a number of years, and this sort of issue, I don't know, I see like where there are gaps, right? I always, I always say, well, if there's any fuzziness around whose responsibility something is, it's that's a problem, right? You need total clarity. And as I would interview CISOs, especially, and CIOs, I was always intrigued by how far they were supposed to run with the business continuity ball, and when and what became the responsibility of the users to put in place and ensure. And that it just seemed like there was a space there that wasn't being filled. So, does that make sense? And tell me what you think about that concept. Is that what you've been trying to do? Is fill that gap and make sure there's no holes there?
I would agree. I think that there's always been sort of this separation between the sort of technology and digital world and the quote unquote business. And I think what we have seen as healthcare sort of continues its digital transformation and we see more transformation efforts, we're building that reliability on technology in our business. So inherently, the technology becomes that much more important. And so when we used to talk about disaster planning, quote unquote, right, before we really had terms like business continuity, we would talk about disaster planning from the perspective of things like, a fire, a utility line being cut, weather, those types of things. And we didn't necessarily think about them from the perspective of like wholesale outages of our technology system. And I think we've evolved that over many years. But to your point, there was this separation between preparing for downtime and business continuity. And so I think what's happening, and I think a lot of health systems are experiencing this, or at least as I talk to colleagues, there's this convergence of the realization that disaster planning, business continuity, and sort of downtimes and outages have actually a similar level of impact, right, on your business. And so it's really about how are you preparing for the impact, whether it's being caused by weather or caused by some other type of sort of force from the outside. How do you prepare for the impact of what it's going to have on your business and really plan for that? And I think that there's a recognition that you need the technology teams, you need the business teams, you need operators, you need clinical teams to come together and really get those workflows and really get that plan solidified on paper. And there's not necessarily a right or wrong, at least, from my perspective and who's leading it out. But to your point, you need a big A sort of on the racy. Like you need that one accountable partner in order to drive it forward. And so whoever that is in the organization, being able to pull all the right people together to make sure you have a solid plan, that's ultimately the goal.
Yeah. So, I mean, how does it work best? Because we've got the IT department. You've got your CIO and your CISO over there that are probably working closely together to talk about business continuity, outages, cybersecurity, things like that. You have your departments, the users in the operational departments. You've got this thing called emergency services,
Sure.
right? Which is going to sort of head up anything, or tornado, whatever. That's an important entity. They could sort of run things, right, with support from IT to help them understand what a cyber outage looks like or any kind of IT outage. But they need to be educated so they understand the different scenarios. But they could run with the ball. Otherwise, what are you talking about? Your COO could run with the ball if they have interest or an inclination. The CEOs, from what I've heard, I'm not sure the CEOs want to own this. I mean, so it's in other discussions I've had, it's I've been talking to CEOs. How do we put our executive leadership, the CEO, the board, how do we put them in a position because they're going to have to make decisions in an
Absolutely.
outage that they may not be prepared to make. You need a framework to make a decision. So how do you give them, prepare them, prep them, give them some kind of framework that, hey, this is what it could look like, and this might be, for example, you might have this amount of information, and you might have to make this kind of a decision.
100%. And I think there are really great ways to approach that. If you have your CEO, your executive leadership team participating in tabletop exercises where you are really walking through the detail and those types of scenarios and giving them the types of decisions that might have to be made with the information, it's so important. You want that to be as much sort of muscle memory as possible. I also think as much as you can sort of pre-document the if thens, right? If this happened with this amount of information, we would be doing this, or you can just sort of decision tree it out. And there are lots of organizations that come in to help organizations form that type of documentation, right? Because just transparently in a situation where you have a true disaster, you don't even know who's going to be available, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so you want as much of that written down as you can possibly get it. You know, in our situation, we were incredibly fortunate. Transparently, you know, our CEO was incredibly supportive. I was able to form very strong partnerships across the executive leadership team around who would do what, you know, kind of without stepping on each other, but clarifying sort of who was leading through what. You know, our clinical leader, our CMO, our operations team standing up the HIC structure, our risk team and how we partnered there. And so it does require a good group of people coming together, actually understanding what's in their lane. And so the way that I kind of describe it, we all work in matrix organizations for the most part. And the way I kind of describe it is it's easier to work in the matrix when you understand your box, right?
Mm.
And so you want to have people understand their boxes, and then you can have people sort of step in and step out appropriately, but you want to make sure that you have some type of foundation. And so I've talked about this. You know, we sort of divided things up, myself and our general counsel, in sort of cures and consequences. And it was an incredibly helpful framework for us so that I could run in my lane and manage my box, and others could manage their boxes, and we could come together at the appropriate touch points. Um, and so I don't know that there's a particular way that it works best to sort of say, hey, the big A in our organization is going to be the COO versus the CM or the CNO, or going to be the in the technology world. I just think what works best typically is understanding who it's going to be, making sure that person has the capabilities that they need in order to be successful, and then building up the support structure to ensure that all of the people who need to come together in order to contribute are prepared and able to come together to contribute. And as much as you can sort of flex that muscle through some type of exercise, right? Whether it's tabletop exercises or downtime or, you know, some other type, as much as you can flex that through some type of exercise, then I think you've got a strong program.
Yeah, very good. So, yeah, I definitely get the idea that everything's going to be different, right? And so there's only so much preparation you could do. But I wonder if there are certain decision points that you can model out. Now, for example, the idea of shutting off the EMR, right? You could say, okay, that's a decision point that someone's got to make that call. So who's going to make that call? And almost like a mini governance, like who do they need to
Absolutely.
hear from to make that call? And
Yep.
another one that comes to mind is going on diversion, right?
Mhm.
Where you're not taking any more patients.
Yep.
So it's super interesting to think about who's ultimately going to be the person that decides that. And again, who do they need to hear from? Some of those would be clinical leaders, to say, based on, Anika, based on what you're telling me about the applications we need to shut off, these are the kind of patients we can no longer see. Right. So it's just super interesting to think through that. Then obviously you're going to have your chief legal officer, whatever the title that may be, at the table to weigh in on all these things and say, oh, we need to hear from one other person, or, oh, we need to do this or that. It's just fascinating.
Absolutely. And, you know, the other part to that that I would just call out is not leaving out the community, right? For the most part, the service that we provide, right, we are community assets. We live and breathe inside of communities. We support populations, and you know, this is also a good thing to run by your patient advisory councils if you have those. Understanding how you can support the community still, but also have the community be a partner, right? If you're experiencing some type of situation that's going to be disruptive to the service that you can provide. And so I think that's exactly it, right? As much as you can sort of have that governance structure documented, understand who can make what decisions and how those decisions will be made, and then understanding what type of information that person needs in order to
Hmm.
make an informed
Hmm.
decision. So you're gathering that and getting that to them in the most timely fashion. I think those are the types of things that really expedite the ability to move forward, expedite the ability for an organization to return to some level of normalcy. but also expedite the recovery, right? So the quicker you can make those decisions, the quicker people then can then take the actions that they need to take, and ultimately, the faster you can get back to where you want to be as an organization.
Yeah, and you get really interesting when you talk about biomedical equipment, right? Who's we need to shut off all these pumps. Well, are any of them being used? Oh yeah, maybe, but we can't shut those.
For
It's
sure. I mean, I
crazy.
think those are the things that, it is in those difficult times where, we talk about this from sort of the CIO, CDO suite, but like, what is that separation between a vendor and a partner, right? What are those things that separate those types of organizations? And I think those organizations who work with you in your most difficult times, who can partner with you, who will tell you what they need, but ultimately understand that we are in the business of caring for people. And so the goal has to be that the enemy is disruption to the ability to get caregivers who care for people back to doing their first job. And so if everybody's on the same page around what the target is, and getting aligned, and that includes your vendors, your partners, your community, your from the executive team to the individual caregiver who's at the bedside, we're all marching toward the same goal. I think then you get people sort of aligned in a different way, where you tend to find that there's disjointedness is if we have disparity across the goal. We don't understand what we have to do first, second, and third. We're trying to figure out how to make decisions while we are actively trying to make decisions. I think those are the types of things that can really elongate a process for getting an organization really recovered and back to doing that first job, which is taking care of people.
Yeah, I don't know. I just I just remembered. I read some history here and there. So when Reagan was shot, in it was '83 or something, when Ronald Reagan was shot, Alexander Haig, I forget what his position was, but he was like, "I'm in charge here," and he wasn't. Because he was the vice president who was in charge. So again, that's good for modeling out who gets to make certain decisions, right? It's like, well, no,
Absolutely.
that's not your call. We need to hear from this person. People maybe for the best intentions might be trying to move, get things going, but it's like, no, 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 that's not how we're going to do it here.
Absolutely. And understanding who all that is, right? So there's the management team, there's also the board, right? How are you going to keep your board informed?
Hmm.
You talked about CISOs. Well, there's your audit committee chair. There are all these folks, right, who also factor into these types of decisions, and understanding how you're going to communicate with them. What have you done to educate them, to prepare them, to your point, to make those types of decisions, right, become really important. And so again, I don't know that there's explicitly a right or a wrong way. I think what I've seen is that the most successful programs have modeled it out. They understand some level of governance. They've kind of figured out the phone trees. People know how to put their hands on the resources that they're going to need in the state of an incident. And then, as much as you can do in order to prepare your environment, understand backups, like all of those technical pieces that our CISOs worry about every day, that comes together in order to truly create a solid business continuity plan. And there's not necessarily this separation between how you'd approach, what would happen if it were weather or an internal incident or and or a technology incident, but from a business perspective, we've all sort of congealed around our goal is to get back to caring for people. This is what we need to care for people. In the instance that something is not available to us, a tool is not available to us, we know what to reach for instead.
Very good. Well, the idea, sharing this is something. I have to say that session you did with Lonnie
Mhm.
was one of the best sessions I've ever seen at a conference.
Thank
So I'd like to give you that compliment. It was incredibly well done in terms of the information that was conveyed. It was obviously like a compelling story, right? Because there was like a lot of drama in the narrative and all that. Um, but it sounds like you guys work together incredibly well. Um, so any keys to that? I mean, it looks like you have a great relationship in terms of the way you work together. You go if the better the team is from a C-suite, the more cohesive, the more they work together, the better they work together, the better you're going to execute in a crisis, obviously.
you.
Anything come to mind there?
I would definitely say, one, I give a lot of kudos to our CEO, Marty, who's my boss. I think I said to him one evening, man, you got a Shaq Kobe lineup. As I think about my partners, and getting those folks to truly operate as a team is no small feat. And so, he worked very hard on building culture. As an executive leadership team, we worked very hard on building culture.
Hmm.
And so, one, I think intentionality makes a huge amount of difference in how you want to see a team show up and how you want to work together, and really prepares folks for sort of being in the bunker together, for lack of a better term. When it comes to my leadership team, Lonnie is great. Every single member of my leadership team showed up in Herculean ways. Lonnie, Jess, Lewis, our CISO, like truly, it was a team effort. Um, my perspective as a leader is our number one competency is teaming. We have to be technically proficient, right?
Mm.
We have to show up and do our jobs every day. But our number one proficiency is teaming. From a technology perspective, we just there's not any usually any one thing that one team can touch or do, right? We pass tickets along, we pass work along. Our data teams and our application teams and our infrastructure teams all have to come together, and so in order to make something work well, we need our product teams to come together, we need the business to give us requirements, right? It's just too much of a melding pot for us
Mm.
not to make teaming a really important cornerstone for what we do. And so that's really how we think about it. When it comes to sort of being prepared to do the hard things. It allows us to hopefully build trust, but also have shared accountability and to be able to call people to the mat when we need to. And my team does that for me. I look for them to do it. I think feedback is a two-way street. And so I think those are the types of things that prepared us to be successful and continue to help us drive forward as an organization.
So obviously, you want to hire the right people. That's the number one key to having a great team. Don't get a bad apple on board. It's easier said than done. You do everything possible. Do you have any thoughts around that, where you try and either put the word out to the people underneath you who are doing hiring or to HR? Do you have any philosophy around hiring or anything you like to do or see or check to make sure you don't get someone on board who doesn't have that same philosophy about team?
Absolutely. We think a lot about culture and fit. I would also say that when I think about the team, I not only think about the job description of a role I'm trying to get someone to fill, I also think about the other type of what people would call soft skills, but I actually think they're really hard skills. But the other type of sort of inherent skills that are really needed in a team in order to flush it out. And so when I think about the team that I have, for example, one member of our team, I jokingly say that she would be like the best accountability coach ever. Like she helps to hold everyone accountable and she will call it to the carpet. I have another person on my team who's literally maybe the most empathetic human I've ever met in my life. I have a person on my team who has that sort of quiet genius thing, right, is a processor, listens the whole way, and then at the end is going to say something super profound.
Hmm.
And so part of it is thinking about what are those things that you're trying to hire for that are on the job description, but then really taking stock of the team and looking for the other things that sort of might be missing. And then I think it's promoting those things, calling them out, having the team reach into each other for them. And then for myself, also reaching into the team for those things. So that's kind of how I try to think about it. I'm very intentional, or I try to be at least very intentional about earning the right to call myself the leader, because I don't think titles can give that to people. I ask every leader inside of this shop to earn the right to call themselves a leader every single day. And sometimes we do a great job and sometimes we don't. And I want to build a culture where on a day where I'm not nailing it, somebody on my team tells me so.
Well, that's very well said. Let's talk a little bit about the idea of burnout. Most people, we talk about this usually when it on the clinical side about leveraging ambient listening and AI and all these kind of things to reduce burnout on the clinicians. It's IT, the IT department rolling out tools to reduce burnout among clinicians. We know that's sort of one of the prevalent conversations. There's also the idea of burnout among IT staff, and I don't see why there wouldn't be.
Of course.
and then you could sort of bifurcate that between a crisis situation. That's one of the things you spoke eloquently about, was sort of that, I don't know, you didn't sleep for 3, 4, 5 days or something crazy. And your husband brought you meals, right?
Did.
He
Yeah, we
did.
had a
We got to give him
Thanksgiving
points
dinner,
there.
brought in by my wonderful husband. Thanksgiving Day, so we had that in the office, with the team. We were able to munch on some honey bake. I think that, to your point, it's really trying to be in tune with the team. We work to be more and more intentional about how we resource, how we're using resource plans, helping people document their time, and then most importantly, using the data that people are documenting so that we can resource appropriately. Um, we work hard to manage the supply, so making sure we have enough people, obviously within the constraints of the organization, but then also managing demand. So I'm very transparent with our business leaders about what our team can and cannot do. I look for them to help make decisions and help us figure out governance around this project's getting approved, this one's not. This is what our turnaround time and SLAs need to look like so we can hire to those standards. But at the end of the day, burnout's very real. When you have a situation like the one that we've had, trying to be mindful when somebody's been working 3 days in a row. I think probably 3.5 days or so in, somebody tapped me on my shoulder also and said, "Hey, you need to go hug your kid and take a beat." And I did. I went home, took a nap, got to kiss my kiddo, and then I came back to work, right? I'd been in the office for 3 days straight. And so like those are the types of things, right? Where it just is, it's also that sort of teaming builds the type of empathy that would have you look to your left at your neighbor and say, "Hey, I think it's, let me catch this ball for you so you can, take a nap, do a thing, right? In that type of crises. And when we have empathy for each other, I think that's what lets us notice those types of things in order to support each other.
Yeah, I love the idea of managing demand. To me, it's such an important leadership quality. It's like you have to balance serving the organization with defending your team from being overworked, or whatever you want to call it. So you're in that position of trying to manage those two things. And I think when we see people that are very unpopular leaders, they are not protecting their team. They're just trying to manage up, and they just want to say yes to their boss for their own benefit and their own career advancement. And to hell with everybody on the bottom. You guys just keep doing what you're told to do. So to try and balance that, because we do have to serve the organization.
Absolutely.
So and sometimes you do need to ask the team to do a little more than you might even be comfortable, but you hopefully it's temporary and you could tell them why. It's a short term, a little sprint here, but you got to balance both. Correct?
100%.
Yeah.
And it's never easy, right? I will tell you, I want to do the things that my leaders want. My leaders have incredible vision, and I love doing cool things. And so I always want to do the things that they want. And I want my teams to have a life and want this to feel like a great place to work. And so it is a matter of finding that balance. And every day I know that there are members of my team who show up and are giving something extra. It's making sure that we have visibility to that, we can support that, and to your point, there's a why behind it. Um, I I would be remiss though if I didn't also say a lot of that is a connection to mission, right? Teams feel different when they're able to show up with purpose. And so, a part of what I work really hard to partner with my operational and clinical leaders to do is to ensure that for the folks who are showing up sort of in these technology spaces, in these support services spaces, consumer and other, to help folks understand the why. What is the actual impact to have technology teams working through the hospital and being able to point out, hey, that's working because of an interface that you built, or the server that you racked and stack is actually what housing the application that's doing this. And so I think it really is that deep connection to mission and purpose. My goal is to ensure that every person inside of our organization understands the why, understands the connection to mission and what they're driving forward. And so we try to draw those really straight lines from data center personnel to DBAs, app engineers. We try to draw those really straight lines to what it is you are really doing and what mission you're really driving forward, and how you see that show up in the care that's able to be provided inside of our organization.
All right, excellent. Just as a final question, Anika, and then I'm going to let you go. Let's go back to the theme of the talk that you're going to give, the theme of resiliency. You had gone through quite the ransomware experience. What would be your, number one learning, best piece of advice for someone in your position who has not gone through such an experience yet in terms of what they can do to prepare?
Um, I'd say that the number one piece of advice that I'd have is find your people, find your team. No one person can lead through an incident this massive. And there are going to be times where, you need to be the quarterback and times where you need to be the coach. There will be times when the CEO needs to be the quarterback and the times they need to be the coach. Um, Figure out sort of who's playing what role when, and then lean all the way into it when it's your turn.
Hmm.
But at the end of the day, just know that you have to have partnership. No one person can carry these types of things on their backs. And so figuring out, who those folks are that are really in the bunker with you and partnering with them through it would be my number one piece of advice. And I'd also say if you don't know the people that you would call who are not in your organization, who are going to have a rational head, who, when it's hour 72 and you're trying to figure out a decision and you're in sort of sleepless
Hmm.
delirium, if you don't have 4 or 5 phone numbers of other folks who sit in your seat that you would call, find them. They will be indispensable in an incident like this.
That's wonderful, Anika. I want to thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it, and I hope we can catch up again down the road.
Absolutely. Thanks
Take
so
care.
much.
Bye.